And howdy, 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 folks. How's everyone doing out there? Thanks for coming to the ComicBase live stream. We're just getting a couple things ready to go here, and then we will switch the cameras on and let's let this rock. Um, and I think we are good to go on that. And let's rack that one over to the other monitor and this one over to the other monitor. And let's get the show. Let's roll it now. Hi everyone, how's everyone doing out there? You're coming out here from beautiful Franklin, California, just outside Nashville. And I'm Pete Bickford. I'm the creator of ComicBase. If you guys are catching us, you are now attending our 20th live stream, if you guys can believe this. I can't believe it myself. We were just having it over coffee this morning with my wife, and we were like, just, yeesh, can you believe this has been going on this long? 5 months of live streams. But anyway, guys, it's been fun, and I'm glad you guys could make it. All right, so we're going to be talking about variants this week, but I have a lot of announcements I want to get through first, if that's cool with y'all. First of all, I want to go to the chat. If you guys have questions you'd like to have answered, please ask them in the chat. I will hit as many questions as I possibly can, and you know, we'll try to be a little more back to interactive than we've been in the last few episodes. Where the last 3 episodes, you guys caught the 3-part series we did there on CGC and Slab Comics and so forth. I didn't take a lot of viewer questions there, and so I regret that. I'm going to try to make up for it this time. So if you have anything you'd like to get answered, please post it in the chat now, and we'll get to it. All right, so let me make sure that we've got our stuff working here. Greg says hi from beautiful South Jersey. Looks like everyone's starting to get their fall weather in, as well as complaining about the political yard signs. I feel you. Jeff says cooling off here in Phoenix, and again with the yard signs. Let's see here. Rob says, hey, and we have sound and picture in Houston. Oh my goodness, can't believe it. This is like, this is a stunning live stream for us that we actually have this going. So, everything is going cool out here in Franklin. We actually have lighting. We have, you know, everything working for once. The weather's not too awful. It's a beautiful sunny day, so I'm feeling good about life. So, as far as announcements go, so a couple of big ones. First of all, we just passed, and you guys are, if you have the archive edition, are going to see this tomorrow's update. We just passed 675,000 covers in the archive edition. This is such a stunning number. I can't make any kind of sense of it. We used to go to these incredible lengths to try to illustrate, you know, how many covers was you know, a certain number. I think when we hit 550,000, I think we figured out that they were, if the comics were all actual size, they were 10 1/4 inches tall, that we could take them from our offices in San Jose, lay them end to end along all the road, going all the way across, you know, up the peninsula, past Facebook and Apple, you know, all the way up across one side of San Francisco and halfway on the other side of the Golden Gate of the Bay Bridge, and that would be what 550,000 comics were. We now have another 125,000 on top of that one. If we ever have to, I'll come with some kind of insane metric to describe what that is, but it's a crud ton of comics. I can't believe everyone who's helped out with scanning it. I can't believe all the work our production staff has put in to do this, and I can't thank you enough. That is just so cool. We have so many comics in it right now that it just anyway, I won't go on, but anyway, thanks guys, this is just amazing. Along with that, we also are just about ready to hit 875,000 comic listings. So we're still, the pictures are lagging behind the comics by just a bit, you know. So if you guys happen to have images kicking around anywhere of ancient boys, you know, comics from the Britain in the 1930s or things like that, wherever you see that there's a comic cover that we're missing, if you guys want to kick it in, man, I'd be so appreciative. By the way, I want to show you this. This is our corrections that came in just last week alone, because we things are just on. You guys are just really going to town as far as just contributing stuff. And let me see if I can pull that up on our Slack channel. So we have a, let me put this up on the other computer if, oh, there we go, cool. So let me switch over to the other monitor there, and that should do it. Yeah, so this is what we did in ComicBase just last week. 1,866 new items, 6,970 price and issue updates, 2,371 new covers in 1 week alone. And I'm telling you right now, I've seen the queue. We did more than that this week already. We're over 3,000 new covers this week alone. Anyway, guys, this is just amazing. And thank you to all the folks who've contributed so much to, putting in the new stuff. Let me show you real quickly where that all shows up. So, when you guys go to the main ComicBase page over here, you'll see right down below the ComicBase scorecard card over in the far right down there. If you scroll down, and let me see here, I'm in some kind of weird view where it's not showing it. I apologize for this. Anyway, but you'll see the top contributors listed down there, and it's a really cool thing. You can also scroll down and see the top 200 folks down there. Can I scroll down? Is it going to let me? Or is it going to be a jerk? Ah, there we go. Top contributors. So Frank Alisardo has the lead at 619,886 points, which means Frank has given us 619,000 either covers or corrections or both. Robert Wood behind him, 328,000. Barry John Shepard, whose record I thought would literally never be beaten, 202,098, and so forth. Just astonishing amounts of contribution on the whole thing. By the way, if you guys are ever wondering, we do have badges in ComicBase under your profile, and some people have asked, well, what are some of the secret badges? I will tell you, the hardest to earn badge of everything in the entire program is a badge called the Commander Shepard Award, named after, yes, Barry John Shepard over here, and it involves having 200,000 or more correction points. That said, an almost as hard badge you can get is just to get onto the leaderboard here at all, which I believe comes up to the first 250 folks, which turns out 168 corrections will get you there. So, guys, thanks again. I can't say enough. You guys have just really knocked us out. And I'll also ask for a little bit of patience because you guys are throwing stuff at us so fast that I believe, checking the show beforehand, we have 15,000. Let me look up the number right now. As of showtime, we have 15,275 corrections pending. Those are ones that came in just this week alone, and that's with our editors gunning full time trying to get on top of things. So, wow. All I can say. So thank you so much for all that. Okay, moving on. Let me close up some windows here so I don't lose my plot entirely. Let me check also with the chat. John says hi from Alberta, Canada. Snow last night and a bit this morning. Wow, cool. And some folks picked up some cool stuff for their collection. And excellent. All right, cool. Other things that are going on. Postage rates, if you guys care about this sort of thing, postage rates are going up on 10/18. This is just sort of a weird announcement because we ship a lot of stuff and we get information from UPS, for shipping that a lot of people don't necessarily aren't necessarily hip to on the first time out. UPS is doing something they, to my knowledge, have never done from before, in that they're introducing seasonal rates. They say, look, we're all getting slammed at the holidays. We have to put on extra staff. It's maybe we have a chance to make up some of our incredible deficit. But for whatever reason, starting next 10/18, so that's 4 days from now, they're going to jack the rates up by a pretty reasonable amount. I want to say it's something like 7%. So if you get something you want to ship and you can ship it a couple days early, yeah, it wouldn't be a bad thing to do. So that's a thing that's going to last all the way through the Christmas season, and then it stops. Other things, speaking of weird shipments, you guys might see the box behind me over there. That is still the box full of Eagle Moss graphic novels. I'm still awaiting word from them as to whether they want them shipped back, because it's going to cost like $140. These are the ones that they accidentally shipped me 2 copies of things I ordered from them when I put in a big order via a mail forwarder. A mail forwarder is a service where they have offices over in Britain, in this case, and you can ship locally to Britain, which is not that expensive, and they, because they ship so much mail, get very good freight discounts shipping it over to America, far less than it would take if you or I were to ship them. So I used a service called Forward to Me, and I put in a big order with Eagle Moss to fill out my collection of DC graphic novels that I've been talking about all this time. And by the way, I'm going to show you, as soon as I get a couple more in, I want to show you a picture of my bookshelf, because it looks pretty cool. But anyway, something went wrong, and they shipped me they doubled up the order on me. They didn't charge me for it. They just shipped me more books than I should have gotten. So I called up and said, hey guys, I did not pay for these books. What would you like done for them? And they said, oh, well, we'll send you a shipping label. And I said, well, okay, I'm just checking over here, and it'll be $141, right? And they're like, we'll get back to you. So several prompts, several email exchanges later, they're still going to get back to me. I'm kind of angling, if I can, to use them as giveaways for the blog, for the podcast here. So if Eagle Moss goes along, then we'll find some way to kind of give them out as prizes for doing something, just being a cool viewing audience or something. And if they don't go along with it, then I guess they go back. But anyway, I'm trying, guys. So we'll see if we can't make it so it pays to watch this thing and something other than knowledge and entertainment. Okay, and let's see here. The last bit of news I want to go through right now is my attention's been kind of split these last week or so. You see a lot of dark circles in my eyes and everything. We're getting into my very, very busy season where we're getting ready to release new stuff, and so I'm not getting a lot of sleep. That said, I had my attention pulled away for a bit this week to also address some issues that came up with ComicBase.com and AtomicAvenue.com. So some things are a little better on those sites, certainly on a technical level. We're dealing with some just network foo that it was grinding things down. You might have seen the system occasionally sort of like slow up for no good reason in the middle of the day. That should be a little better now, but hopefully we're getting a handle on that. But unfortunately, it pulled me off task a little bit. That said, we are making excellent progress on the new stuff that I wanted to tell you about, but it's going to have to wait probably a week before I go to it in any detail. So this week will all be about old stuff. So let me do a quick check of the chat, and then we will move on to variants. All right. I need to get a mail forwarding service set up for AA sellers. Man, that would be great. Honestly, it's one of the big puzzles we've got with Atomic Avenue is, Atomic Avenue is, if you guys don't know it, is a service that is kind of a sister company to ComicBase or Human Computing, where the idea is we partner with them and we make it so that you can very easily sell all the things you've got marked as for sale to one place, Atomic Avenue, and they go all up at the prices that you've already marked them as. And so it becomes very easy to have just an enormous amount of inventory to browse through, because you've got anyone who wanted to sell for it suddenly gets their own online store, and there's no seller fees until you sell something, in which case there's just a percentage of the sale goes to Atomic Avenue, mostly, which covers most of that covers just the financial processing of the credit card. Unfortunately, to make it all work, Atomic Avenue has to handle the money, which means that if you sell on Atomic Avenue, it basically works the same way that Amazon used books sell. So in other words, if I sell something on Amazon.com, I've got an old copy of something, an old video game or something, and I want to sell it there. I sell it. They say, okay, great, you sold it, ship it to this guy over here. They handle the money on the whole thing. They took the sale, they handle any kind of dispute resolution, things like that. But then they tell me, hey, ship it out to this guy here, and as soon as I know it's been shipped, 2 weeks after that, you get money transferred into your account. Atomic Avenue works the same way. Unfortunately, because Atomic Avenue isn't taking control of the inventory as well, they're not the ones doing the shipping, and so they can't take advantage of any of the freight discounts that would come if they were acting essentially as a consignment house and a giant warehouse to actually ship everything through. You guys might have noticed that Amazon ships packages for tiny, tiny fractions of what would cost you or I to ship packages, because at its heart, Amazon is almost a logistics company above all else. It just happens to, sell consumer products. Also, interestingly, the only part of Amazon that makes money, or at least as of last fiscal year, to my knowledge, was actually not Amazon, the marketplace. The thing that we buy toothpaste from or books or whatever else. That actually doesn't make them any money. The thing that actually makes money for Amazon is a thing called their Amazon Web Services, AWS, which was a play they had, which they sell off all the excess capacity from running one of the world's largest server farms. They sell it off to businesses, and they run data centers all across the globe, where companies, and one of those companies actually was Human Computing, this company. We bought time on their servers. We essentially bought a virtual machine from them to host our stuff because, man, we could host out of a world-class data center. Who wouldn't want that? Unfortunately, it's something where it was a great way to get going, and it's actually what allowed me and my family to move from California to Tennessee without bringing the business down during that month that took us, because we could move all our stuff up to the cloud. Unfortunately, it also comes with pretty high bills in terms of like bandwidth and things like that. So, but that's actually the one part of Amazon that actually makes bank. Speaking of Amazon, by the way, you guys, if you care about these things, Prime Day is going on with them, so it's a big sale they have on Amazon. So stuff that you might want to buy is a little cheaper for, until I guess midnight tonight. So have a look if there's something there. Nothing that I particularly want to see because I already have a lot of tablets and doorbells and all the other stuff like that. But if you're in the market for any of that stuff, Amazon.com. Why not? Okay. So, let's see here. Yeah, Greg says, sleep is overrated. Yeah, if only. What's the story behind the human computing name? Human computing started out as a consultancy for human interface work. I started out my career at Apple Computer, where I worked in human interface. It's designing the interactions between people and computers. In the old school 30, 40 years ago way of things, there was two... there was the idea of like the hardware interface, the software interface, and then the human interface, right? So it wasn't like the hardware talking to the software. It wasn't software talking to the hardware. It was the idea of like, how does the human talk to the whole system, and how do you put that all together? And it was related to a discipline called human factors, which is tends to be very biometrics oriented. It's how many times can you press a button before your finger gets fatigued. If I need to design the lid on a Coke can, and I need to make it so the pull tab, which has a 5-pound force in order to burst the seam and actually drink the Coke, how much of the average human fingertip do I need to make it can be fit inside the pull tab in order to make it openable? Human factors gets very involved into questions like that. But human interface it goes by a lot of names these days. The most common one is user experience. It's basically the idea of like, how do you let people work with computers very easily? So anyway, that's where human computing began as a human interface consultancy, and then I had a problem where I wanted to sell my comic books, and then we got off onto a different thing. And if you guys ever want to read the full story about where ComicBase comes from, look up ComicBase in ComicBase, because it gives you the whole story there. Okay, Andrew says hi from Quebec. So let's get on with variants. First of all, variants. Let's start with what the heck are they? So a variant comic is the idea is when I have two copies of the same comic book, and if I were to open up the covers, they'd be the same inside, but the covers, something's different about the outside of that comic book. Let me show you real quickly, just on the computer screen, what I'm talking about. So let's go to, say, Spider-Man. All right. So, okay, so Spider-Man, this is the 1991, it came out, and it had an issue number 1. This was kind of green over here. You had, yellowish letters for the Spider-Man. But, there was a second printing. It was in gold. There was a 1A, which, had something different about it, which if I studied the notes about it, I would be able to tell. There was one that came, and they kept on coming out with slightly different things. But if I were to open up any of these ones inside here, I'd find out that they were all the same comic inside. It's just that they all had different covers and etc. Now, Spider-Man is not the only guys who did this kind of stuff. Variants have been with us for a while. Matter of fact, one thing that's kind of interesting is, let me switch over to something else. Pull that up. Yeah, here we go. So, when we started ComicBase in 1992, variants were getting to be a little bit of a thing. But, I thought, well, is it one of those things we could hold off for a bit and not really address right away? The answer, of course, was heck no. You got to handle them right away, just like you got to be able to handle second printings. Half issues were getting to be a thing in the early 90s and so forth. So if you guys have noticed that, and also, even before then, we had the idea of like annuals and king-size specials and giant-size editions and so forth. So if you guys might have noticed that an issue number in ComicBase is actually made out of 4 different things. It's made out of an item type, which could be something like an annual, it could be a regular issue, it could be a king-size special, it could be a giveaway, etc. It's got an issue number, which is the numeric portion, which, interestingly enough, is not an integer. It's actually a real number because you could have half issues. You could have negative issues. Yes, they also invented -1 issues, -2. I believe -3 is weird as that ever got with the X-Files. You can have pi issues. Yes, there was a issue of, I want to say, The Amazing Cynical Man. I could be having that wrong, which was issue 3.1415. Sorry, it was literally issue pi. Anyway, after the issue number portion of an item number comes the variant, which is the part that is followed, slash whatever the variant is. And we used to give these ones descriptive names like DM for direct market edition or /GO for gold. It eventually gets to the point where there's so many of them, we just these days just kind of go A, B, C, D, E, F, G until we run out of letters. And then finally you have dash and then the printing number. So I believe the record for printing numbers legitimately is Classics Illustrated, some of which went to the 24th, 25th printing. But we've had to abuse that one in various formats just to deal with variants because variants got so crazy. But let's back that story out just a little bit and talk about, where variants went over time. By the way, the idea for doing this whole thing came from a guy named David Harper, a journalist who had inquired with us a number of years ago to do some kind of background research on whether variants were, where did they come from, how many there have been over the years, and so forth, and what's their vector of growth. I mean, is it a flash in the pan? Is it going away? So forth. So we actually went and did some dredging out of our back-end data and just said, well, let's compare comics which are variants versus things that aren't a variant of one sort or another, and let's pull some data over the years. And we use this as the basis, or David used this as the basis for an article he wrote, which he's doing an update of right now. So it gave me a chance to go back and revisit some of the data and pull some new figures on this. I don't know what David's take on all this is going to be. He may go off on a completely different tangent than I am, but I wanted to discuss, hey, I figured we had to go to the trouble of digging up the data. Let's share some of it, because it's kind of interesting. Anyway, so going back to the 40s, I didn't pull the data back in the 30s. I'm pretty sure that variants were insignificant in the 30s, or so forth. But going back to the 40s, and I hope you guys can see this all okay. I made it as big as I could humanly make on the screen while not giving away the plot entirely. So the number of variants versus the number of total comics. So, and this is U.S. alone. This is not international. U.S. alone, there were 13,811 comics in that decade that we know about. 44 of them were variants. Okay, kind of weird, but nothing much. All right. Oh, and I went down a little too far. I'm gonna try to line by line this one just to keep the suspense going. 1950 and 1959, 22,666 comics going. By the way, if you guys care about this sort of thing, a site called Comicron, run by John Jackson Miller, is the king of comic stats. I don't think he has these sets of stats here, but if you ever really cared about circulation stats over time, or like how many issues of Spider-Man #1 were ever printed and so forth, John Jackson Miller is your man. He is a font of knowledge about just sort of like the nuts and bolts of the comic industry, and I would highly recommend his site. So anyway, the comic industry obviously was putting out in the U.S. a lot more comics. It was actually kind of fading out in the 40s, it kind of got pulled out a little bit here in the 50s. Think about this as, the era that gave us Tales from the Crypt and so forth. Superheroes were not a massive factor in the comics world at that point, but man, were there a lot of general interest comics and so forth. And apparently 504 of them were variants of one sort or another. Now, that surprised me. I didn't really expect there to be variants in 1950. And I looked at it, and what they basically were was 15-cent price variants. Comics at the time were typically running for a dime or 12 cents. Classics Illustrated was the one that was bigger, better produced, nicer cardstock than your average comic book. It was meant to be somewhere in between a comic and a textbook. Was kind of the way that was being portrayed in the market. And so they felt that they were justified in at least trying to charge more than your average comic. And so to figure out whether they could get away with it, they tried a number of the comics they published over those years where they tried putting out 15-cent versions of their of their editions and seeing if anyone would bite. And obviously, we know how that ended in the end of the day. Now, going into the 60s, so the number of variants went back down again. Only 113 of them, 16,000 comics, 756 in America published during that decade. But we're talking about like 0.67%, 2% over here. And then the 70s came out, and you take a decidedly upward trend in terms of variants. All right, so what was happening in the 70s? 23,000 comics published. Superheroes are in full swing. You had the revival of Marvel and DC. They all flowered in the late 60s and and so forth. And now they're going full steam. Comics are getting to be a standard American thing. This is the time when you could go and basically see any kid's bicycle and it would have a Spider-Man sticker on it or a Captain America symbol and so forth. So comics were doing better, right? What was happening in the 70s is primarily price variance. Now, they weren't publishing separate covers yet, but what they would try to do is they're trying to figure out how to get between 25 cents and 30 cents, or between 20 and 25 cents, without losing all their readers. Because, again, as you're trying about a 20%, 25% bump in the cost of a comic, you're wondering, it's like, man, aren't the comic buyers going to just go for something else? So they would try out in a separate market. They would say, well, all right, in the Duluth market, or in the in the upper Midwest or something, we'll try putting out a 30-cent copy or a 25-cent copy of the latest issue of Spider-Man, see if it sells, and if it does, then we'll do something else. The other thing they would do during that time, I believe, was Whitman. Yeah, so Whitman variants were it was a co-marketing deal with Marvel primarily, although I want to believe some other guys got in with it, but Whitman, Marvel for certain did. No, I'm getting that wrong. I believe it was Dell that got into it. Basically, there's a couple different branding on the whole thing. You'd see Dell Comics would come up with a Whitman logo or not with a Whitman logo. And the other thing, and I was getting this confused, so I apologize for that, is you would also see certain comics get issued in 3-packs, where they would come out and be remarketed as part. You could have bought the regular one off the stands, but it might come up with a different cover price, or maybe even with a Whitman logo on it, and get remarketed as part of a 3-pack, where you're always trying to peek through the middle of the pack and figure out which of the 2 comics you could see on either side was the one in the middle worth your 90 cents or whatever it cost to get that. And that's what was going on during the 70s. But we're up to 8% now of the market is now variants. 8% of all the comics published are in a variant of one sort or another. All right, then the 80s come along. Okay. We're done with our price variants or whatever else. 644 variants out of a total of 23,862 comics published during that decade. Okay, 2.7%. But here we're starting to get legitimate variants. Like, I'm going to do the same comic, but I'm going to do it with 2 different covers. It's not a big deal yet so far. It makes it, so you see, a hollow foil, a chromium version, or a gold ink version versus a regular ink version, a silver, so forth. A lot of ink colors were going on during this time, but still very small number. These were considered very special at the time. You'd see direct market editions that would come out that would have a little bit better paper stock than the newsprint versions. You'd see sometimes they would have better ink on them and so forth. And they're distinguished by a higher cover price, typically. All right, and then the 90s came out. Now, the 90s, once this started taking off, you'll notice we stopped going by 10-year periods here, because things, once they start going very fast. All right, early 90s. Now, everyone can think back to 1992. Image Comics is starting to come out. All the big artists are leaving to join Image. Marvel's figuring out that I can sell a jillion copies of Spider-Man #1 with different covers and so forth. And they're thinking, hey, this is a pretty good deal. I've got the same printing plates. All I got to do is swap one of them, and add a 5th ink, or add acetate for an extra layer on the whole thing, or add a chromium version, whatever else, and I can both upcharge the comic and sell the same comic to people multiple times. As a matter of fact, because they seem collectible, you'll buy the same comic and you'll feel like, this one's rare, I better buy a bunch of the other ones. Oh, yeah, Greg points out it was not Dell Whitman, Gold Key and Whitman. Yeah, absolutely correct there, Greg. Thank you. Okay, so Anyway, so now we're in the 90s, and we start out 5.7% during the first 4 years of the 90s, first 5 years of the 90s. 1995 comes along, and we jump and we almost triple over the course of 5 years. What percentage of the comics in the market are variants? 29,000 comics of various types printed. 4,000 of those are variants of one sort or another. We're up to 15% of the market. ComicBase, by the way, launched in here, so even in there, clearly we were going to have to deal with variants. By the time this came along, I was starting to wonder, God, is this variant thing ever going to stop? Come on, maybe it'll all settle down. Maybe don't need to worry about this so much. But anyway, it was not to be. Rolling forward another 5 years. Early 2000s, 26,942, almost 5,000 are variants, 17% of the market. Next 5 years, we're up to 30% of the market. Now look at this. We are moving a crap ton of comics. 38,978 comics. And by the way, some of this, and Comic Crown will point this out. These are comics where we know the cover date and so forth. And some of this data gets a little bit more specific as we go. So, if you want to see full-on comic stuff over years, if you're trying to answer this question over the whole thing, I would say Comic Crown is probably a better site overall to get definitive data on different significant issues on the whole thing. We're not bad, but he might be better. But one thing we do know is of the almost 40,000 different issues that were published that year, 12,000 of them, give or take, were variants. We're up to 30% of the market, basically, is now variants by 2005 to 2009. Rolling forward another 5 years. Almost 50,000 comics published, but almost 22,000 are variants. We are now approaching half the comics that come out in a given year are a variant of one sort or another. And now we'll go year by year. 2015, we're up to 53%. 2016, 57%. 2017, 65%. This, I believe, is when we were first asked the data from David Harper to say, what's of all the comics that were released, what percentage of them are variants? And that's when it really struck me as like, oh my goodness, having the archive edition around just so you have photo reference on all this stuff is so crazy useful. It's nuts. Because we used to try valiantly to describe, what's the difference between like all these different art variants and so forth. And then we'd say things like, yeah, it's the orange background on the sky, and Red Sonja's holding up her sword aloft on the mountaintop for variant A. That's the Deodato cover. And the variant B would be the remarked blah, blah, blah cover, and that's the one where Red Sonja's riding a horse and she's swinging a battle axe or something. And there'd be these very lengthy notes in the whole thing trying to describe what they're all like. We still attempt to give some kind of note as to what's different on the whole thing, but honestly, we're getting overwhelmed. So we'll note we'll note things like Deodato cover, but at this point, having just the art references say like, oh yeah, that's the B cover, beyond useful. 2018, well, we caught a break there. Only 64% are variants. 2019, not to last, 67% variant, and 2020 so far, 68.84% of the comics that have been on the market so far in this depleted COVID-19 year. Almost 70% of them are variants of one sort or another. Okay, if you guys are looking for that on a graph, it looks a bit like this. Let me shrink that down. So yeah, that's that. Go down just a little bit more so it can all get on there. So this is the percentage of variance of the total by year. Now, granted, don't pay attention to the slope here because we changed up the scale starting right here. So the slope, if you looked at it and everything was all even, would be much more abrupt up and to the right. The actual numbers are right. It's just I want to point out where this graph gets a little bit deceptive is because we changed up the interval. Anyway, so what does this tell us? Oh, by the way, another interesting bit of this one, to look at the same data a different way, is if you come out here and you say, all right, just the number of variants versus the number of regular comics, right? You start out very similar in the whole thing. By the time you get to 2020, you only have 2,500 regular comics and you have 5,700 variants, you know, as far as, you know, basically for every regular comic that comes out there, 2.2 variants have been printed in 2020. This is insane. Just I mean I don't know how you look at this and don't say like, wow, we've got something going on here, don't we? Okay, so take a real quick check at chat. Okay, we are doing good. So let's talk about what kind of variants we're even talking about on this whole thing. So there's a number of different types of variants, as we discussed. There are, different price type variants. There's, different experiments with different cover treatments and so forth. But another way, when we look at the market for variants, as far as where they come from, there's another way of looking at. First off, you say there's the publisher-based variants, which is, say, I'm DC Comics. I decide to make 20 different covers of Batman the Dark Knight 3, and I'm going to do them, I'm going to solicit all the different things. I'm going to attach different artists to each of the different covers and so forth. They're going to get solicited through regular channels and so forth. There also can be those are typically orderable on some level or another. In other words, if I knew they were coming, I could somehow get my hands on them using normal methods. Another popular type of variant is out there is called the subscription variant. What happens on that one is typically the subscription isn't coming from the publisher itself. So like if IDW puts out a subscription variant, what they're typically doing is they're ordering, make several copies, several versions of the same comic available to to your comic retailer. But the idea being that if you are a comic retailer, you can give some additional value to your customers by saying, look, I'm going to give the B cover, I'm going to give the subscription variant, the one that's a little different than the one that's just on the stands. I'm going to give that to the people who have that in their pull and hold files. So if you have a standing order for Doctor Who at my store, I'm going to give you the cool cover that isn't out, in the general area, and so that way it's a little something for you just to be my customer. Now, what that looks like to your dealer, on the other hand, they can order them in any in any mix they want. If they wanted to just order all subscription variants, they could have. It's up to them. But they label one the subscription variant, the other not, and so typically they're no more rare than the other one. But the other one, to the extent that your retailer is playing along, typically that one gets to be it feels a little more exclusive. There are incentive-based variants. Now these ones legitimately are rarer. So typically if you have a big comic, I got a Red Sonja #1, and so I'm the publisher, and I'm going to say things like, all right, I've got an A, B, C, D, and E cover, right, and they're all from different artists and so forth, but I'm also going to have a 2-to-1 incentive cover. So for every 2 copies you buy of Red Sonja, I'm going to allow you to order a copy of cover F. I'm going to have a 10-to-1 incentive cover, which is to say for every 10 copies you put in on the order, I'm going to allow you to order one of the in number G. And these can go, the highest I think I've ever seen, I want to say is 500-to-1. It might have been 250-to-1. So for every 250 copies you order of a given comic, I will allow your store to buy one of the really, 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 really special cover. Now, what this means when we look at this is we have to immediately, and your store will do the same thing to you, they will immediately say, well, all right, this is a $4 comic book, I got to buy 3 copies of this in order to get, be able to order the one over there. So if I'm going to sell you a 3-to-1 variant, I'm immediately going to mark it up to at least $10. There's a little table we use internally in ComicBase when we're doing, when we know something's a 3-to-1, a 5-to-1, or whatever else, and it tends to reflect pretty well what the initial price is that eBay or your retailer or whatever else will charge for any given one. And trust me, if someone's got like a 25, 50-to-1 variant, they're not giving that thing up for anything like cover price. That thing is going to cost you an arm and a leg to get a hold of it, because the thought being that this thing is rare as as rare as anything, and you're going to pay for it if you really want it. Or at the very least, this is the one that if I sell it, it covers a big part of my spend for having bought all the other ones. So that's the game that your retailer is doing. There are also convention variants. Convention variants, sometimes they are a version of a popular comic. It doesn't even need to be a current comic. It can be one that came out some time ago, but it will have a special cover for the convention. A lot of times it will be either a uninked either an uninked or an uncolored version of the regular cover. And sometimes it's just a completely blank cover, or just it has the frame and like the name of the comic book, and the inside of it is just uncoated paper so that you could, bring it to a convention and they can sketch on it for you if you happen to actually meet the artist on the whole thing. These ones are honestly, they're the easiest variants in the world to make. They've already typically got the primitive art in order to make them. So if you guys know how traditional comic books go, a traditional comic book starts off with, they're called the pencils. You make rough, you start with like stick figures, but you basically do a rough drawing of what the whole thing is. Those are called the roughs. Those then get finished off into the finished pencils, which is like a pencil version of what the final comic will look like. Then a guy comes around with an India ink pen and does inking, and that's what gives it its final shading and color that then gets colorized if it's a color comic and so forth. And then that's the comic that in a traditional process would get bought. Now, in the world of computer graphics, a lot of those things get mushed into one. Sometimes there are no pencils. Sometimes the whole thing got done on somebody's Wacom tablet, and so one guy might have done the whole thing. One guy might have done parts that never would have been part of his job to start with, or so forth. But if you do have someone who's still working traditional style, typically just as an artifact of doing the final cover, you would have a copy of you'd have a pencil sketch or a pencil version of things. You'd have an ink version of things which isn't colored yet, and then later on the colored version is what you'd buy. Well, if you're the publisher, you already paid for the pencils. You already paid for the inks, right? Why not sell them separately and just give that one out again? Honestly, we've done the same thing with ComicBase. Sometimes we've done like convention versions of ComicBase where we didn't have the final art done yet, and the artist would have given us like the sketches that they were using for the painting that was going to be on the cover. And because the final thing wasn't going to be ready for another couple weeks, and we had to be at Comic-Con that week, we would print up versions of ComicBase which only had the sketch as the outside cover art, or sometimes that was like what we use on the inner booklet. But anyway, so that's those are cheap to do, and it's really cheap to do if all you're really giving the person when they buy the comic book is a frame with your logotype and the number of the comic book, a barcode, and an empty white square for people to sketch on. So that's that's super cheap. So why not? All right, finally there are, well, not finally, penultimately, there are private variants. So there's nothing saying that you need to limit variants for any reason. Hopefully you guys are getting that one. We used to, by the way, try very hard to devise a series of codes that were self-descriptive and fit the times and made sense. You could look at the code and say, oh, if I have the leth version, or the or if I have the GO version, that's clearly gold. If I have the PL version, that's clearly platinum. Because these were the popular variants at the time. But as variants caught on, there was no stopping finding different ways to make them unique. The craziest we ever got, I want to say, is around 1994, where we would have abbreviations in ComicBase for things like the Leather Nude Edition. It's the one where instead of covering up the naughty bits on everything, you bound the thing in leather and you showed the naughty bits. That was actually like LND or something was the version, the abbreviation in ComicBase at the time. Now you guys might have noticed over the years, we just threw our hands up at a certain point and said, look, we can never come up with a descriptive variant to make any kind of sense for this stuff anymore. We can't do it. You win. You purveyors of variants in the world, you've outstripped our ability to make sense of it. And so we just say, it's the A edition, it's the B edition, it's the C edition, so forth. All right, raises some good questions, right? First of all, how do we know what's the A edition? Well, sometimes we get lucky. Sometimes the publisher will actually put a little code on the whole thing and tell us, this will be the A edition, it will look like this. If the things go through Diamond, a lot of times they will say the A edition will be this cover. It will, come out. We'll have 1,000 copies printed. It will look like that, and so forth. And we'll take it from there. A lot of times they don't, because a lot of times they're just so busy printing covers they don't really know what's going on. In which case, our first cue when we're looking to figure out what do we call one cover versus another cover, if they haven't given us any heads up on the publishing front, is we'll look at the barcode. And if you guys have a barcode and you look at the far 5 digits of any barcode, it's called the supplemental. So there's a big part of a barcode, larger digits over here, and then there's usually 5 digits to the right of that in smaller print. And it's a group of 3, which if you look at it is typically the issue number, followed by 2 more digits. So the 4th digit is supposed to be the variant. So obviously it's only 1 digit, right? So, so if it's 1, that's usually the regular copy. If there are no regular copies, it's the A copy. If it's a 2, it's the B copy. If it's a 3, it's the C copy, and so forth. All right, the 5th digit is supposed to be the printing, right? So if you've got 2 as the final digit in that supplemental, it typically means it's a second printing of the comic book. That's how it's supposed to go. It's how the people who make barcodes define how we suggest you use the barcode. And to the extent that we get variant, comics in that we have never seen before, that's how our indexers try to assign the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so forth. Where this breaks down, a couple of different ways. First of all, is there's nothing stopping the publisher from putting any dang barcode they want on the cover. When you buy, when you join the, forgetting the name of the trade association that regulates barcodes. It'll come to me, I'm sure, at some point, unless one of you guys know, want to put it in the chat. But when you join that one, you pay your dues. What you're buying is essentially the first 5 digits of your barcode. So 59606 is Marvel Comics, right? No one else can have a barcode that starts with 59606. That's just it. Now, the next 5 digits are going to typically be the series number. So if they say 2583831, maybe that's Guardians of Gallon's 5th series. You don't know. Nobody can tell them what to do with the rest of the code. Only Marvel controls that part. Now, these guys can get shut down if they ever use DC's barcode, if they ever start using, I forget what DC's, prefix is. But if Marvel ever did that, there would be hell to pay. I mean, probably the world of e-commerce would blow up. At the very least, they'd probably get in a lot of trouble with the people who issue barcodes. But there's no review of barcode, designations after that initial group of digits. Now, there's supposed to be some check digits at a certain point. Those have to check out, and so forth. But most of the rest of those digits are really up to the publisher. And as you might guess, most of the time they get it right. Sometimes they get it wrong. Sometimes the poor schmuck who has to put together the comps, which get submitted to Diamond, or that get imprinted in the barcode font for the cover. Sometimes he's on the ball, sometimes he's had enough coffee that day, a lot of times he doesn't. There used to be a number of barcode publishers, Devil's Due, absolutely infamous for this, just did not seem to get the whole concept of barcodes, and they'd print things with 2-digit supplementals, they'd reuse barcodes. When you see these in ComicBase, sometimes you'll scan a barcode and it'll say, hey, there's 3 different comic books which have no relationship to each other, which all have the same barcode. I want to say Scout Comics was terrible with this when they first started, as was, what was the Indian publisher? But anyway, lots and lots of barcode runovers were just whatever poor intern that they gave to keep track of the company's barcodes just didn't have, let's just say was under-caffeinated for the day and was not really getting it done. So when that happens and you're scanning into ComicBase, we'll go boop, boop, and we'll give you a big window which says, all right, there's 3 different comics which have the same barcode, which one is it? And we'll try to show you, names and descriptions of each one, then you pick the right one and take it from there. Anyway, it does happen. So what comes down to, that's the first thing, is so you can just screw up the barcode. Next thing you can do is you can overrun the barcode. So as I mentioned, the variant part of a barcode only designates 1 digit for the variants. Well, what happens when I want to have 50 variants? for a given comic. So I want to say there were things like Godzilla #1. I want to say was printed with like 120 different variants. It was one of these ones where, any store that wanted to could commission their own variant, provided they said, I'll order a minimum of 500 copies, and then they'd say, okay, great, got a 500 copy in for this thing. We will have one of our artists make you your very own variant. So at that point, the barcode can't handle it, and so they start just randomly using other digits. And unfortunately, ComicBase also, we can't handle it. We've got A through Z. Now, it was suggested maybe we go AA, AB, AC, and be like Excel spreadsheets for the whole variance things. But at some point that doesn't make any sense. So you will actually see times in ComicBase where we are forced to, and I believe there's like 12. Last time I knew what the real number was, it was like 12 comics in the entire history of comics. Had so many variants we had to essentially use the printing field and abuse it in a way that it was not meant for. It's not really designated the printing at all. It's just designated that this is the 123rd variant of this comic. It's terrible. We're sorry. It's not optimal. I hope they stop. That is one where I'm going to say it's probably not worth reinventing the entire wheel of issue numbering in order to accommodate the 13 or 12 or 13 comics that have ever done this. But anyway, if it keeps going, well then I think we'll probably figure something else out. But that's where we're at the moment. Okay, let me do a quick check-in with the chat before I go further. Let's see here. Pete, do I have variant counts include second printings? No, second printings are separate. So what this is specifically in that spreadsheet was counts where it either has a variant or doesn't have a variant code. Printings and comic types are a separate issue. Greg says, I ignore variants, and we're going to get to that as well. That absolutely makes sense. I would like to ignore variants, and we're going to talk about all the stuff in some things. Love to get some numbers in the late 70s, early 80s, Marvel UK, I'll cover variants. Quite possibly, maybe we'll do that one as a follow-up. One of the problems on digging these numbers up is it's really tedious from our standpoint. I can think of no reasonable way to give like a good interface to something that's just a data dredged question like this. This is really one of those things where like I'm just literally firing off SQL queries into the heart of our database and trying to do various summations and so forth. And it's a little tedious. It can be done, but it's unless I was doing it every month, I don't think we'd wind up automating it in any particular way. But that said, if it winds up being interesting, we can certainly do the work to do something for a future show or article. Let's see. For incentive variants over the last, say, 10 years, what do the data say about how long they hold their market value? I'm going to get to that one in a bit. Because these are all great questions. So, if you don't know, has John Jackson Miller crunched these data? I don't think John gets into valuations, is my understanding, but honestly, John would be a great guest on the show if we could work a way to get a live link going between us, because he's a really interesting dude. I met him when he was working over at Comics Buyer's Guide. He was their data guy, but he was by the way, also, you might know John Jackson Miller is the author of Knights of the Old Republic. He's become a very famous fiction writer and comics writer in his own right. And so he's one of these guys who got into the industry on one end of it and really did great, but also kept an interest in like the technical side of the industry. One of the things, he's the only guy I know who is just absolutely fascinated by the question of, throughout the years, looking at all the different subscription and retailing and distributor sources, how many copies of different comics have existed at any given moment. And because this data is impossible to find. It was a project of years for him to piece it together from different distributor records. There is no one-stop shop for any of this stuff. And he's done as brave a job of this as any man ever could. So I don't know a guy who has a better feel for how comic distribution has changed over the years than John Jack Miller. He'd be a great guy to have on. Like I said, reach out to him and see if he'd be interested in setting up some kind of live show. All right, so let's see here. GS1 is the barcode association. G51? Am I reading that right? It's not the number I'm thinking of, and now it makes me want to get out my makes me want to get out my manual. So we joined in like the 90s, and there was basically at the time it was like you could write a check for like $400 and get your rental on one barcode, number. Matter of fact, excuse me a moment, I'll tell you what ours is. Reaching over to my other bookshelf. So apparently 70781, as you can tell from the back of a copy of ComicBase Archive Edition, 70781 is ours. No one else can have it. We paid our rent on it. Right after we bought, our rent on 70781, somehow barcodes got super popular. They weren't as popular right up until then, but right after that year they got super popular, and the guys who ran the organization tried to change the rules to say, oh yeah, that $400 you gave us, yeah, that's just for 1 year. You got to pay that every year now. They tried, and a massive lawsuit came down, and in the end they had to back down from it and basically respect the initial terms of the renting of the barcodes. So my understanding, at least at the time, was that newer people still were meant to pay the whole thing, but because we bought it like the right year, got to keep ours forever. I don't know if they back down entirely, and when you buy it for good, because I haven't had to buy one of these since the early 90s. So, but that's the deal on that. Okay, so, but yeah, GS1, I gotta say, it isn't ringing any bells for me. I want to say it was Uniform, God, I want to say UCC, Uniform Code Council. Does that sound right to folks? I don't want to think about it. When you paid your money, you got sent back a big set of legal documents along with a big barcode usage manual and printing specs and things like that. It was a big hunk of stapled together paper. It was very high tech for the 90s. That was a thing. Okay. My friend Bob mentioned to me that even though a variant should have its own barcode, a lot of times they use the same one for all the variants on the issue. Absolutely true. It's better than you'd think it'd be, but yeah, people do reuse things, which is why when you're in ComicBase and you scan in, especially if you're going add by barcode, there's kind of two theories on how we do it. I know prior to the current version, if you were using the jump command and you beeped in something, we'd take you to the first match under the theory that you're looking right at the comic. If it's the wrong one, you'll find the other one on your own. But if you said batch and there was a conflict before you went on to the next thing and moved on with your life, we would stop everything you did, show you an intervening dialogue which said, hey, beep boop, here are the 10 comics that all share the same barcode, and let you choose between them. By the way, on barcodes, another thing where that comes up a lot is if you happen to have barcodes from the late 80s, when barcodes were kind of just getting started for periodicals, you would see that a lot for things like Captain America, if you bought them on the newsstand especially, because back then they only used a 2-digit supplemental, and the 2 digits in that case weren't encoding the issue number, they were typically just encoding the cover date. And so Captain America 187 and 199, because they reused the cover date, they would have the same barcode. And so you'd also get the B-boop if you're scanning one of those older issues as well. All right. That is GS9 not for profitable. Yeah, I mean, could be. It might have even changed names. Like I say, I've kind of lost interest in it since the 90s. Once we got in ourselves, it's like the DMV. It's like you're really interested in the DMV when you're going to pick up your tags, and after that, if the DMV completely reorganizes itself, if you don't need new tags for a year, you don't care. SQL is the fun stuff. Yeah, yes. Thank you, Stealth DBA. Absolutely true. All right. Okay. Andre says still in the contributor list for number coming 2. Stop contributor when in the beginning. I can tell you, scam was 300 DPI jamming your server. So Andre, yes, thank you so much for that. And by the way, if you guys are doing contributions of scans, absolutely, we have big servers now. So yes, send us 300 DPI covers. We love that now because that scales beautifully for 4K. Don't bother sending us anything higher than 300 DPI because basically at that point we're all kidding ourselves. I have a scanner that goes 3200 DPI, but all it's really doing is it's scanning the space in between printed dots. And that doesn't do anyone a lot of good, because the comic itself is printed at effectively about 266 dpi is where most comics are. Some of them are effectively at 300 dpi. Comic printing uses a term in printing called a line screen. It has to do with the interposition between like the different color plates. If you guys ever do printing, there's a cyan, a magenta, a yellow, and a black plate, and they get lined up with each other. And there's a resolution to each of the individual plates, and that resolution tends to be about 133 lines per inch. And so anyway, that becomes effectively 266 dots per inch. Don't go over 300 dpi. You're kidding yourselves. It's not helping. That being said, if you do have any scans, scan at 300 dpi. We would love to have them because they look great on a 4K monitor. All right. Let's see here. John says, I'm not liking when you use the lookup in the mass barcode control eye that you can't see the covers. You can see the covers. They're a giant picture over on the far right. Let me... Gosh, why do I never have comics around when I'm doing these podcasts? This is stupid of me. I will show you that another time. Actually, I can show it to you now. Let me... Let me pull up ComicBase. So let's go to the other monitor. Let's actually pull ComicBase onto that monitor. Have I got the right one? Yeah, okay. So, all right, give me a moment. I'm moving things between screens, so just need a second, and I will get set up here. All right, and let's go over to comics, and I'm going to reverse engineer this a moment. So let me go, and sorry if you can't see it, but I have a 4K monitor to the left of this one, which is much bigger, and so it's kind of weird when I'm moving things onto the monitor that I'm able to show you guys on the live stream. All right, so let's see if this guy's got a barcode. The Saga of Tanya the Evil. Excellent. All right, so let's see here. Tanya the Evil. Yes, you've got a barcode. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this guy right there. All right, I don't have a barcode scanner, but just to prove I'm not cheating, right? All right, so here I am. I'm looking at Saga of the Relv. I'm going to say add by barcode, right? And I'm going to say, now if I were to have beeped in this barcode, it would show like this. At which point, you'll see a giant picture of the Saga of Tanya the Evil one right over here. That shows up in there. If you're not seeing a picture of the whole thing, my guess is you probably got the Pro Edition, which Pro Edition is great, but major difference between the Pro and the Archive Edition is covers. So it's something where, especially if that's the case, and you're not seeing them, well, if you have the Archive Edition and you're not seeing them, you know, and you can't figure it out what the deal is, give us our tech support call, because you probably have your pictures pointed in the wrong place. And we're happy to help you find those. If you're using the Pro Edition and you can't see the pictures, and you'd like to, look for when we do a sale. One of the secrets of ComicBase is there's a fluke of our pricing, and it's one thing that we knew the first time we did sales like this, but we kind of like the feature in its own strange way, which is we will typically do a sale when we do a sale. We've literally done one sale this entire year, so don't hold your breath. But that being said, holidays are coming up. If this should arise in your purchase time frame, I would suggest having a serious look at it. But if you've got the Pro, you can typically upgrade to the Archive Edition during our sale for like 99 bucks. Which is the same price an Archive guy would pay to upgrade. Archive guys typically pay 129 bucks for their yearly updates, because it has so many pictures and everything else. There's a lot of bandwidth and expense and cost involved with that whole thing. But the Pro guys, we typically grandfather in, because what we're secretly hoping, I'll just say it, is that we're hoping that once you start using the Archive, you're never going to look back and you'll be like, yeah, absolutely, the Archive is for me. I need the pictures. So we kind of, as an incentive to Pro people, we kind of let you upgrade cheaper than you probably should be able to. So if you catch it during a sale, have a look. It's I would tell, like, I on all this stuff, I kind of like come down to, like, what would I tell a friend? I would tell a friend, look, if you still actively collect comic books, and we're in a world where 68% of the comic books that come out are a variant of one sort or another, I would want pictures of them, and if that cost me the equivalent of like $8.50 a month to get that, that's nothing. I would do that anyway. And we'll try to also give you some other good reasons to go archive in this next edition, which I'll tell you about later. Okay, enough of a sales pitch. Okay, yeah, let's see here. John says, especially with the newer issues that have multiple, whoops, sorry, newer issues that have multiple variant covers. Some Dark Knight 3 wouldn't scan first issue. Yeah, had almost 100 covers, 2 of 2. Yeah, by the way, so speaking about custom variants, that's a great segue. Let's talk about that, because that was actually the next thing I had on my notes I wanted to talk to is custom variants. So I mentioned so far there's different types of variants. There's publisher-based ones. I'm IDW. I say I'm going to make an ABCDAFG version. I get subscription variants, which are like a soft variant where the variantness is really controlled by your own comic store, although they're really bought in equal proportions. Incentive-based, where I got to order 5 or so to 1, to get the different comic. There's convention variants, and then there's private variants and store variants. So if I'm a store, now a lot of times, like when Godzilla came out, the deal was if you bought like 500 copies of Godzilla #1, that you could have a picture of Godzilla squishing your store. They had the basic idea of Godzilla squishing. They had that kind of down there. I guess they're really, if you draw Godzilla for a living, you're really good at drawing him squishing stuff. Anyway, so they had that going, and then a lot of retailers got a real kick out of the idea of like saying, hey man, I run Farscape Comics, man, show him squishing my store. I'll put in an order for 500 of the things. I'll try to make back some of my money by selling the store variant at a little extra money and so forth, and I'll have something kind of unique. It'll be my store getting squished on the whole thing. Now, this actually I think is good fun. I actually have no problem with this at all, with the exception of it led to there being just hundreds of variants. And that's one where we had to, there's no other way we could do it. We had to say, look, this is the 1A version, and that's the store variant version, and -1 would be, and then the name of the first store, and -2, the name of the second store. And so we went all the way through 230 or whatever it wound up being. There was no other way we could get through that. Anyway, so we actually thought when Batman: The Dark Knight 3 came out, because I'm a big Frank Miller fan, and I thought, well, hey, Frank's back in action. It was actually not him. It was not the level of involvement he had on the original Dark Knight, but I thought Dark Knight 3, that'd be great. And they were for a while offering. It was a very short window where you could put in a kind of an order, and I think there was some money involved too, where you could more or less commission a special variant of your of your own for a very famous comic book, and I gave that some serious thought at the time, and we didn't quite pull it off at the time, but let me tell you how that works. So you actually can or could. I reached out to IDW for official comment on this one. I didn't get a call back before, as they say, press time. So what I'm repeating here is a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of what I'm reporting secondhand. So feel free to second source everything I'm about to tell you directly with IDW. But the general process is, let's say I wanted to have a ComicBase live stream copy of I don't know, Oblivion Song, right? And so I want the next issue of Oblivion Song. I want to have the custom ComicBase live stream version of it. The way this would typically work, now Oblivion Song I believe is, God, I gotta look that up. I'm gonna say image, but maybe I'm getting it wrong. Oblivion Song is image. Yes, okay, I got it right. All right, so let's say I wanted to have a custom copy of Oblivion Song number, what are they up to? 24, right? And I wanted 25. I guess they're on 20. Yeah, ironically, I was going to say 24, but if I scrolled down, I saw that yes, there was a 25, which came in a flip book, a B, a C, and so forth. Yes, they already did a bunch of variants on this guy. Anyway, but all right, so scrolling down, I guess they're working on 27 or 28. But let's say I wanted to have my own comic-based version of Oblivion Song. The way that this typically works with most publishers is, first of all, you approach them and say, hey, we'd like to do this. And they say, okay, great. What's your, who are you, first of all? Because they don't want to do, I mean, nobody wants to do the politically controversial one. I mean, if we were, if just name whatever political group you think you hate, and if we were from them, and say, yeah, we want to have our version of Oblivion song, they would see like, yeah, thank you, no, not going to happen. They probably also wouldn't want one that was branded with something that was not against their branding somehow. I mean, you don't want to have DC coming up with their own version of Oblivion song. I mean, and so forth. DC isn't going to have a variant of a Marvel book and so forth. But let's say we want to have the comic-based version of Oblivion Song. They'd probably be like, oh yeah, that sounds fine. So how does it work? So what we do is we say, okay, well, here's our concept for what we think the cover ought to look like. And they say, okay, that sounds, instead of him shooting the weird ghoul thing on the cover with a shotgun, we say, well, we want this one to be, it's I don't know, one of the other characters doing something else cool with, something else. And they say, okay, that sounds good. And they say, oh, pick your artist. And you get, typically there's one or two artists who do the covers, or at least the kind of like the go-to cover guys at, for a given title. And they'll say, well, okay, what's your first, second choice? And a lot of times you get your first choice. And then what you do is essentially pay the page rate of the artist. You pay if it's traditionally inked comic, you'll pay the traditional page rate for the inker and the colorist. If it's a guy who works digitally, you'll just pay the one artist on the whole thing. And then you agree to take a certain number of comics at wholesale prices directly from the publisher. So in many cases, this is something like, if I want, it might be like, say, IDW's minimum for a long time was 1,000 copies. So if I bought 1,000 copies of the latest issue of, I don't know, what's something IDW is doing these days, Zorro or something. They would go ahead and they would go ahead and print me up my own copy of the whole thing. I would buy let's say it was a $4 comic book. I would be buying them for effectively, somewhere around $2. Might be a little less, might be a little more. And so I'd have $2,000 plus art fees in, and that's my end of the whole thing. Against that, they're going to have me 2,000 copies of a comic that is uniquely, and it is a uniquely comic-basey type thing, and that's pretty cool. And so I'm pretty chuffed to have the first one at least. And then I sit there and I say, okay, that was great. How do I get rid of these other 999 copies of this amazing comic of mine? Now, what most people in this position do is they kind of just mark them up and they say, okay, this is my store variant. Graham Cracker's Comics is famous for doing this sort of thing. They would, the Graham over at Graham Cracker's just likes variants, and he thought it's kind of cool having his own store variant. So he said, hey, we're going to do a lot of store variants. And for a great many years, there were a lot of Graham Cracker's variants of different comic books. I don't know if he still does it, but certainly over the years, I've typed Graham Cracker's variant into more comic issues than I care to think of. Well, this would mean that Graham is now the sole supplier of Graham Cracker's variants of any of these comics. Now, to the extent that you want one of these, you're going to go to Graham, right? And he's probably going to charge you at least double what the regular copy would cost, at least initially. Now, if he can move them out at double the original cost, especially because he bought them at wholesale rates, and you buy them all from him, if he clears the whole thing, Graham made bank, right? I mean, he might have really made some loot on that whole transaction. And to the extent that you really like collecting variants, this is going to work out great for him. It works out great for you. Everything's golden. I think the problem comes when you don't manage to sell all 1,000 copies of, whatever the latest thing was that he got a variant of. Maybe he just kind of said, yeah, I've got enough Graham Cracker's variants in my collection right now. I don't need another one right now. At which point you'd see Graham would have a variant box over at his stand at Comic-Con, and they were priced, somewhat down from what he would normally charge and so forth. And again, God willing, at the end of it, he doesn't have 80 other boxes in his back storeroom that are all the same comic that don't move. So it really comes down to, look, it's a speculation. It's if you can move them and you can get what you want, then it's all cool, right? It's like, and there's even scenarios where you make bank on it. Where it gets dicey is what if you can't clear them, right? I mean, think about that chart we had with, when comics started really taking off in the early 90s. It's like when the first time in the 80s or the early 90s, the first time you saw a variant copy of Spider-Man, you're like, oh, I have the special one, right? do you really do that today? I mean, when you see the 23rd, cover of Oblivion Song, number 25 or something, I mean, does looking at the D cover of this one give you the same thrill as saying I had the one, silver ink copy of Spider-Man number one, or does it just kind of wear you out? Um, I can't answer that for you, but I do know that I know that personally, I at least have an absolute exhaustion, of the variant thing. It's like you're like, okay, yeah, it's the Q variant of this thing. I'm like, yeah, whatever. It's like I care. Is that the one that costs a fortune in order to buy the one copy because you had to buy 50 copies of the regular one in order to get it, or is it just kind of a regular one? The mere fact that it's a variant no longer excites me in any reasonable way. At this point, it's just housekeeping for me. That's me. I gotta say, it's probably the way most people I've ever talked to feel at this point. Is they're neat to a point, but we passed the point where we're really excited a long time ago. So, yeah, I mean, look, my beef with variants, to one extent, is I guess I come back to Jim Valentino, the guy who did Shadowhawk way back in the day. So we're back in the early 90s with the dawn of Image Comics, right? And he was asked about, well, hey, you guys are starting doing variants a lot these days. How do you feel about variants? Because I noticed you got a regular copy of Shadowhawk number one, and you got the silver ink version of Shadowhawk number one. How do you feel about them? And he was like, yeah, I think they're neat. I think it's cool. You got, the shiny version, you got the other version. It's like, I think they're cool. I wonder if he'd have the same feeling now. It's just, when it's not uncommon at all. I mean, we're literally at a point now that there's by far, at least by number, more comics that, are variants of one sort or another than there are non-variant comics. It's 2-to-1 at this point. Now, I'm not saying issues of comics. The problem we've got is that you could have, a given comic that has 5 variants. That's not the same as 5 issues of the thing came out and, had or didn't have a variant. The ones that have a million variants kind of outweigh things, but I mean, it's not exactly news that comics have variants anymore, and I just don't know that we feel the same way. Or at least I don't know that the market seems to indicate that most people are super excited anymore. I think there are people who get excited about some of it, but they, in my experience, tend to be a bit more speculatory. On the whole thing, it tends to be a little less genuine. Oh my goodness, I have the really cool special one. I've never seen this one before. I gotta have that one, or I gotta collect them all. I don't see that one as much as, hey, this is the one that's going for $1 jillion on eBay, and if I get in on it quicker, I can, quickly turn a buck on this one before everyone loses the plot and moves on. That is, I guess, how I'm looking at the market by and large. I do think the ones that are like legitimately rare, like 100-to-1 variants. Yeah, again, they have a built-in floor to their pricing. It's very rare to see those ones, even 10, 20 years on, drop to anything like cover prices. Whereas the ones that were just like, oh, hey, this is the variant by the hot artist, as opposed to this is the variant by the not as hot artist. Back in the 90s, the hot artist version would be worth a lot, and the not hot artist would be worth, the same as the regular edition. Now, roll that whole cycle forward, and unless they were limited in some way, typically you don't see a lot of appreciation for particular art prints of those comics. Same thing goes for like gore cover versus non-gore cover. I haven't done a study of nude versus non-nude. I mean, that could be a different deal. Because let's face it, there's built-in interest in the human beast for looking at naughty bits. So maybe that's different. But as far as like think about like who was the cool artist of the moment, whether it was Rob Liefeld or Tom McFarlane or whatever else. There used to be like the McFarlane variant of Comic X was worth a lot more than the Mike Deodato one or so forth, and that's not a trend that we've seen in the pricing over time. It's momentarily true, and then not over a longer period. So, there's that. All right. Let's see here. Let's see. Pete, do you see the covers when scanning in comics? Do you have a barcode that hits 2 issues? The dialog comes up that show the covers of those 2 comics. I would have to look at that. pretty sure that in ComicBase 2020 that we do show the covers on those, at least in the grid, but in case I don't, I will have a look at that. Unfortunately, I don't have a great way to simulate that one just at the moment, but I would like to, I will follow up on that question if I can. Okay, let's see here. Question. A couple of the weekly update files are wonky. We try to open the file, a series of 48 tabs, the various error messages. I have not seen that. The update logs are just text files, so I don't know how that could be corrupted. But please feel free to follow up with me over. Feel free to follow up. Oh, hang on a second. I know exactly what you're talking about. All right, All right, so Scott, what you're talking about is if you say, I've downloaded an update, and the update file is going to have a name. Its file name is going to be something like, C:users / Pete Bickford / documents, blah, 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 blah. It'll have this massive name, right? Anyway, anywhere there's a space in that entire path name, I don't know, my name, Peter space Bickford, right? Windows has the option of opening it up and essentially splitting the path anywhere you want. The thing that you will find is if you have your browser closed, if you're using Chrome or whatever else, if that's closed and you click on the update file, typically it opens up just fine because Windows is handling the opening. What we're basically doing is just saying we have a document. Please open it using whatever you use to open documents like this, and they're HTML files. So typically it's whatever your Windows web browser is. But if your web browser is already open, so if Chrome is already open, then it's up to Chrome. Because what happens is Chrome gets a message saying, "Hey, Chrome, file : and then a big long list of things with a bunch of slashes in it and spaces would like to be opened now." And a lot of times Chrome will break it into separate tabs because it doesn't know how to parse its own thing there. So what I would do in that case to open up the file is just close your browser tabs, click the update, click the open again, and you'll be able to open it just fine. It is annoying. I literally know of no fix because we're not actually in the loop at that point. We literally are just saying, Windows, please open this file, and then Windows opens it. But then if the thing that already opens it, that handles it, which is to say your web browser, is already open, then it gets to decide how it opens it, and some of them do it well, and some of them don't. I believe the ones based on the Chromium engine aren't doing great in the current set of releases, because I seem to remember fighting this one earlier this week because I was trying to find a workaround for it, and to my knowledge there is none. So the workaround basically is close your web browser, click the open button, and then it'll go. You also can find the update logs separately if you just go to your update logs folder in Windows and just open them from there. That also is a good way it goes, because at that point you're opening them from Windows. Okay, let's see here. Mike says my local store did that to get I'm assuming we're talking about the custom store variants. How soon are you able to get all the variants and covers if available after final order cutoff of the Diamond distribution list and Lunar UCS? So here's the rub on this one. There is no logical end to variants. In other words, we will get. Typically, we will look. We're provided information from the store, not the stores, the distributors on. Okay, yeah, the publisher's going to put out 8 copies of Oblivion Song number 38, and they will have the following artists assigned to the different covers. And sometimes the artist switches around, and we do our best to deal with that. But this is how they'll solicit it to us, and we'll put that out in ComicBase. Then the date comes when they actually ship them, and we will have ordered 1 copy each of all the normal comics. We don't try to buy every variant of everything because we would also go broke. We can't afford to buy 50 copies of, Red Sonja number 1 in order to get the 1 special copy. You wouldn't believe our comic bill, and honestly, we're not going to spend more. It's not a thing. Some of these ones we're counting on you guys to deliver to us. But even if it weren't for that, so we've got the information that came through the publisher. We had that already. Then there's the ones that they say, well, all right, here's the one that will give you if it's 50 to 1, and we'll tell you about what it is later. And then the problem is then you get store variants, which maybe they come, maybe literally there's an indefinite number of them. You don't know until the last minute how many got commissioned. You have convention ones, which can come years after the thing was initially shipped, and whereas they literally go back to press on a comic that's 2 years old and print up some convention ones because, hey, Archaea needs to make some money to cover their booth fees, and like if they sell a bunch of convention exclusive copies of some old material, if they sell them each for $10 each, that goes a long way to covering their booth fee, and it costs very little to go back to press on some of these ones. So they literally didn't exist until the convention. So those can come along, and then again, people like us or whoever else can go back and sometimes years after the fact say, hey, we'd like to have yet another copy of, or a multiple printing. You might have seen on Spider-Man #1 from 1992. It had multiple printings and variants from 20, 30 years after the fact. So there is no final list of variants. All we have is we have everything we've ever seen. We try to put the images in with them, and then we have everything that all you guys have ever shown us, which we add to the mix. But there's unfortunately there is no final list of what everything is. We're as good as you're getting on that in terms of the final list, so we do what we can. But I can't give you a better answer than that, I'm afraid. All right, and that I just gave the long version. What Gregory just said much more succinctly. Okay, Craig cracked me up, man. You were absolutely right on all that. Okay, let's see here. Yeah. What do you do if a mass barcode in the comic doesn't scan? So if you're ever scanning comics in and the barcode isn't coming up, it literally means we don't have a match for the barcode. So barcodes also are initially provided to us by the publisher these days. So when they solicit the comic, they're supposed to say, and it will have barcode X, because the barcode itself, as you probably saw, there isn't a ton of information. I'm going to try to get to focus on that. It's not going to catch it. But yeah, you've got basically, guard digit, you've got 5 characters that tell you who the publisher is, 5 characters which tell you what the series is, and then maybe the supplemental gives you an issue number, maybe it gives you a variant code, maybe it gives you a printing, but that's it. That's all the barcode gives you. The thing you got to have to make a barcode really useful is you got to have a corresponding list of every real comic out there in the world, what barcode corresponds to it. And that we do by, we get some of the information from the publishers, and most of it we put together our darn selves by, editing and putting together data over time. So if you're scanning a barcode and the barcode doesn't come up, could be the publisher just never provided the info to us. Could be they provide us the wrong info. Man, do we get that a lot. Where it gets solicited with one barcode, but whatever poor intern put it out, it changed hands by the time they actually shipped it. When we scan the comic, there's actually, when we do our indexing, there's a check step that typically happens where we're scanning in our own comics as we go, and if it doesn't show up for us, then we know that the barcode didn't match. And I don't know, I want to say 1 or 2 out of every 100 will have been mis-solicited on one way or another, and we try to get those out. And we'll also put them out as corrections as soon as possible. But yeah, barcodes that don't match, it's a fact of life, in which case you're back to one of the other ways of looking up a comic book, which you just hit the lookup button, you start typing in the title, and you find it as best you can by looking at the data that's there. All right, Pete Bickford action figure cover, yes, absolutely. Okay, separate search system doesn't scan. Yeah, so John, if I haven't answered your question properly, please follow up with me later. You can reach me at pbickford@human-computing.com. Happy always to, matter of fact, I think do I even have this? Show Pete Chiron. Does that work? Hey, there you go. That is my email. I'll do it again in case you didn't catch it. No, come on. There we go. And feel free to write me directly if you need questions I didn't manage to answer completely during the podcast. Okay, and all right, guys, I think for right now we're going to call it from there. I didn't get as much answered as I wanted to, so I have some more questions for later, but we've gone long because there's a lot to talk about, and I appreciate y'all hanging in there. Real quickly, yeah, no, I'm looking at the 2 questions that people sent in earlier. I don't have a quick answer to either of these. Oh, no, all right, I do have, I'll give a quick-ish answer to one of them. Adam had written in saying, if I've got a comic that's exactly the same as another comic, but this one comes with a certificate of authenticity from the publisher and it was signed, is it a variant or is it just a signed comic, right? So a signed comic typically we don't track as a variant ourselves because there's an infinite number of them. You could have your little sister sign the comic. You could have the inker, the letterer, the editor, any combination of the above. They could have signed it in red pen, blue pen, whatever else. Tracking signatures as variants is that's not going to be a thing for us. That said, if you have a publisher edition, and typically they'll do something to kind of make it officially a publisher edition as opposed to I just happen to walk up to, Greg Rucka at a show and get him to sign my comics. So what they'll do is they'll say things like, and Dynamic Forces used to do this a lot, a company called Dynamic Forces. Later in the game, they got more hip to the publishing thing, and they'd put a little DF on the logo, and so you could tell the comic was a DF, variant right from the start. But especially when they're just getting started, their first several dozen issues, what they would do is they were in the business of essentially doing what CGC was doing later on, is find a comic creator, get him to sign 500 copies of something. He gets paid off something on the back end. They print up some nice certificates of authenticity on the whole thing. They sell the thing for 5 times its normal price. You get a little certificate of authenticity saying, yep, that really was Greg Rucka's signature. And it comes out as a Dynamic Forces Special Edition. I'd say in cases like that, yeah, it actually is a separate edition, even if it's the same damn cover. And because basically what you have is you have a publisher making an edition out of it. It isn't just a one-off. So in those cases, I'd say, yes, that's legitimately a variant. If it's just you bring your stuff up to Greg Rucka at the show, that's not a variant. What you would do with that, typically if you have a copy that's special to you, but you want to keep it apart from everything else, there's what I would typically do if it were my own. So if I have, Stan Lee signed my copy of, whatever, what I would do is I would write down signed by Stan Lee in the notes. I would price it whatever I thought it ought to be priced at, which would be, would reflect what I thought the value of that signature was to me. And then I would click the lock price button at the bottom of the whole thing so that the update would not overwrite my price. At which point then I have a special copy which is unique to me, but it's not its own variant. And that way, also if I go to sell it one day, you'll see that, when I post to say Atomic Avenue, that, Pete's copy of Just Imagine, Stan Lee with whoever else creating the whatever, that one's $50 because Stan Lee personally signed it, and it'll say so in the notes. All the other copies are $2.95 because they're just the regular copy, but they'll show up in the same place on the system, and they become more saleable. It's just the one will show up, as having a higher price, and it will tell you why. That's how I would handle that. Okay, guys, that's got to be it for now. I am going to have a beer, and thank you so much. This has been quite a week. I'll tell you about it some other time. But, guys, thanks again, and please like and subscribe if you will, and tell your friends, and we'll catch you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.